There is a lot of, someday I'm going to die and you will regret not doing this or that for me, or for treating me a certain way, etc., etc. And sadly, these manipulations can work quite well because so many people carry that fear of the possibility of even more regret once the narcissistic parent dies. Blood is thicker than water. You've all heard this one. Some of you may even believe it. Probably more than some of you believe this. The origins of this proverb go back to the 1100s. It was in German manuscripts, and the initial translation really spoke to family loyalty. That family commitments or relationships would have to take precedence over the bonds of romantic love or friendships. Now, I actually think this proverb, that blood is thicker than water, is sort of an enably proverb that is often used in narcissistic families. A sort of permanent get-out-of-jail-free card for family members to behave badly. But then, after somebody behaves badly in a family, they can fall back on this idea of family loyalty as a be-all, end-all. Now, if you come from a healthy, happy, close-knit family, then this proverb may feel intuitive. Yeah, we always stick together and we got each other's back. Good for you. But for those who originate from narcissistic or otherwise abusive family systems, it gets very complicated very quickly. In some ways, the greater the pathology and the dysfunction of a family of origin, the more pathologically bonded a person can feel to the family system at large. And they're often drawn back by emotions, including to finally wanting to work it through, to be seen in their family system, finally get it right, win over those toxic family members, show them what you've done in your life and are doing, as well as sometimes feeling guilt if you were to actually set healthy boundaries in those systems. Some people feel that they cannot escape narcissistic family systems either physically because of necessity or guilt, and the shame and the confusion that keeps them in psychologically, because even if you move to the other side of the world, your family may still be in your head. You still hear their voices, their gaslighting voices, their mocking voices in so much of what you do. That isn't really family loyalty. That's family stuckness. But blood, the statement, the proverb, blood is thicker than water, is often used as a way to minimize, for example, like, for example, if you were to go and seek out a more supportive group of friends or something, if you finally create some distance from a narcissistic family, and let's say you perhaps decide to take your vacation or holidays, spend holidays with friends, or make more of almost a family structure with your friends, your family of origin may turn around and say to you, oh, those friends, they're telling you that you're so great, right? And all that, because you just need to hear that. But that's because they want something from you. They're working an angle. Blood is thicker than water. Your real family will always have your back. And that will confuse you. Because after a lifetime of being abused and invalidated and gaslighted by this family system, you're still able to be confused by your family of origin. You may even buy the gaslighted nonsense your family is selling you, and then start having doubts about the motives, about the lovely systems of friends in which you have immersed yourself, and then get sucked back into the toxic family system. Narcissistic family systems don't like to lose control. They don't like when you marry healthy people that help you foster boundaries. They don't like when you find friends who cheer you on and psychologically support you and encourage you. They don't like they don't even like it when you succeed. These family systems are often designed to keep people psychologically sort of imprisoned, to keep their sandbags on their balloons so they don't float away, always feeling not enough and off balance so they can keep controlling you. Now, given what I do for a living, I have actually always disliked this proverb because I think it really plays on guilt and misassumptions. And it gives a family carte blanche to behave badly and then fall back on a foolish proverb as a manipulation. We'll have your back more than other people do, even though we've never had your back, but you can't say that. The other challenging aspect of this proverb is that for many people, it fosters a sense of grief. One of the massive psychological tolls of a narcissistic family of origin is the sense that you did not get to have that very human and necessary experience of a safe childhood, or unconditional love, or a sense of connection, or having adults in your life who value your aspirations and celebrate you. There is grief at missing out on that very, very human experience, and a grief that really coalesces in adulthood at the impact and the realization of not having had that, what was missed, and a rumination about how different your life could have been if your early family relationships had been healthy. And as an adult, if you had healthy relationships with your parents and were free of all of the anxiety that growing up in a narcissistic family system can give you. The grief over your own limiting beliefs about yourself, the grief over not having that blood tie to a system that has your back instead of a system that manipulates you and can impact you every day. So when these kinds of statements are made, that blood is thicker than water, they double down on the grief and guilt and shame that so many people experience when they come from narcissistic family systems. Some people cope by creating healthy families of their own. Others cope by drawing together friends into what feels like the supportive and loving family they wanted. Others cope by creating other ventures and things in their life that have a social element. And that's not water. It's something far, far more healthy. It's authentic ties, and that may actually be thicker than blood. In my estimation, a healthy family system, your blood, would celebrate your friendships, your relationships, your successes at work, and your dreams, and would never fall back on a nonsensical proverb about blood and water, but instead always be a safe space for you to land and celebrate the good things in your life. So while it's lovely to believe that your family would always have your back, it's very painful when they don't. And it can really bring up isolation, grief, and shame. And perhaps families that really do work well don't need to make this distinction. So falling back on this proverb, any family that feels like you have to say blood is thicker than water may be protesting too much. Because if you have to say this out loud, the family probably doesn't work, because in a healthy family system, people know that that system is there for them and doesn't get threatened because people have wonderful friendships and marriages and succeed. But in families that are manipulative and controlling, falling back on easy proverbs like blood is thicker than water can often feel people stuck and controlled and never being able to access the unconditionally supportive spaces that they need to be able to succeed in their lives. So can you just do it for me? Right? The people who say this to you aren't necessarily bad people or super manipulative people. Maybe they're a little manipulative. They may be well-intentioned or even desperate. They may be enablers, or they may be people who do not understand narcissism. And this may be a statement that is particularly relevant at holiday times of years. Though make no mistake, it can happen throughout the year too. Weddings, family reunions, and work meetings. So let's take this on. Can you just do it for me? What does it mean? It's not to do a thing. Saying, can you just do it for me, is often mobilized to coax you to spend time with a narcissistic person that you may have worked very hard on trying to disengage from, after recognizing the negative impacts of this person on your health and well-being. It may not even be just one person. It may be an entire family or workplace or organization. And you did the heavy lift to try to heal after a long period of time of blaming yourself, of trying everything under the sun, and then blaming yourself some more, and finally landing on a place where you either read the books or watch the videos or got the therapy or all of the above, and maybe even got to radical acceptance, and you really disengage or even end the relationship. And then you did the painful and grief-laden work of finally distancing, really, really disengaging from whomever this person was. Again, this theme often comes up with family, whether it's a parent or a sibling or an extended family member or multiple people in a family system. You may have even done it beautifully, disengaged and distanced, done it right, not told anyone, and even been gentle. You might have even said to your family, you know, I can't do it. It's not good for me to spend time with this person or people. I can't do it anymore. You may even finally be allowing yourself to feel again, to get into that space where you're able to feel empathy for that narcissistic person from a distance, not have to absolutely hate them, but also recognize that their issues, their behavior, their personality, even their backstory that got them here, you can see it. You even feel bad for them, but you do not intend to interact with them if at all possible. It's not easy to do, but you got there. And the few times you had to interact with them for whatever reason, you felt terrible afterwards. So then, someone you actually may care about within your family system, or that former colleague that you like, or that friend reaches out and says, hey, we need you to come to this event or be a part of that gathering. And you say, I am not sure I can do that. It is not good for me. I'd really prefer not to go. You say something nice but direct. You find a way to say it. And then that person, the person you actually like who's making this ask says, can you just do it for me? Listen, from the most empathic point of view, the people who say, can you just do it for me, may be desperate to draw you in. And sometimes not just for terrible reasons, sometimes for actually decent reasons. They want you present at something that's important to them. Sometimes they're doing it for selfish reasons. They need an extra pair of psychological hands on deck and they know you're useful, or it may spread out the burden of having to deal with the narcissistic person. But it's not okay. The person who says, can you just do it for me? Which is basically, can you just show up and put up with this person regardless of how it hurts you, to lighten this other person's load or fulfill the kind of vision they have of some group of people or family? This is a form of triangulation, of manipulation, of selfishness, sloppiness, or interpersonal laziness. And the problem is that it works. Because you may really like the can you just do it for me person. They may usually be a really good person in your life. But having to manage the narcissistic people in a system brings out the worst in everyone. And in essence, they are weaponizing your loyalty to them, to break down something you painstakingly crafted. Boundaries and protections and disengagement, and endured the grief to build it for their benefit. Anyone who is from a narcissistic family system has endured this. And it can actually bring up the old feelings of, am I a bad person because I stepped away? Am I the one who's cold? Am I the one who's being rigid? This kind of ask, when someone asks you, can you just do this for me? Can sometimes set people back in their healing a long way. Because when you do it just for them, you are now putting yourself back into proximity to a person it took you a long, painful time to disengage from. Now you may be better equipped to deal with their toxicity, especially if it's time limited. Radical acceptance means that you can breathe into exactly what this is going to be, and you recognize how bad it will be, and you don't go deep. You don't defend, engage, explain, or personalize. You ensure you build in something on the back end, whether it is therapy, a conversation with a supportive friend, meditation, sleep, rest, something to get your nervous system back online. You may also tell the, could you just do it for me person? No. And then depending on the nature and the personality and who that do it for me person is, you may be faced down with any number of things. It could be insults, it could be invalidation, it could be gaslighting, anything else to mobilize you to do the thing that they wanted you to do in the first place, which was to interact with a narcissistic person. So sadly, you also need to have a chat or at least a mental review of what to do with the "can you just do this for me" person, because this cannot become a regular thing. It can't be this long-term you being pulled in all the time. And if "do it just for me" person is willing to trade on your loyalty, you care about me, so do this thing that is harmful to you for me, it's tricky, right? Maybe it was a desperate one-off, and you can let them, okay, I'm going to do it this time, but never again. And if you want, you can share your why, your reason for not wanting to do it. But remember, the vast majority of people still don't get this. And frankly, if they do get it and still did this to you, that is a problem. The grief of the narcissistic relationship and healing from it are the collateral losses that come from people who may not support what you need to do to keep moving forward and not remain stuck in the self-doubting, subjugated hellhole that is a narcissistic relationship. That sometimes means losing people from our lives or distancing from people who are not necessarily narcissistic or toxic, but were status quo maintainers, enablers, short gamers, or just selfish. And it can feel like your network can shrink and become smaller and smaller with each of these kinds of things and asks happening. But this "can you do it just for me" gambit can definitely set folks who are healing back. And obviously, you need to assess these asks on a case-by-case basis. But when it happens to you, please try to not let it take you back to self-doubt and self-blame, but see it as the tactic it is and communicate with the "could you do it for me" person to see if they can hear you. And in some cases, they may surprise you and actually hear you clearly and let go and say, "I understand why you can't come." And then that would then speak to the strength of a relationship you have with someone who just wanted to loop you in. And you may even be able to work with them collaboratively to help them craft a solution. But can you do it just for me? Can you be in a situation of harm just for me? A lot of us fall for it, but when it happens to you, it may set you into having to think about this more clearly and a lot of steps, which I hope this video clarified. Something can happen to you in a narcissistic relationship or in a family system. It can feel sort of like a dare. And this can happen because you grew up in a narcissistic family. And it may be on the basis of past relationships. But has anyone ever said anything like this to you? Have you ever heard this? Things like, "Oh, you're too much. I do not see how you could make a long-term relationship work." Or, "You're a bit extra. Who is going to put up with all of this?" Or, "Oh, you're just a cut and run person. When the heat gets turned up and the relationship turns real, that's when you always cut bait." Or, "I know you, when the relationship isn't fun anymore, you're not going to be able to handle it." Or, "Oh, you're just too immature to make a relationship work." Or, "Oh, come on now, you just expect your partner to be your parent. I don't see how you could make an adult relationship work." Or, "Oh, please, whenever you're in a relationship, you start to cry and say how we're being mean to you. How could you make a relationship work?" Or, "Oh, please, when this relationship got real, you couldn't handle it." So you get the idea. The sort of story you were being sold about you is that you didn't or don't have what it takes to manage a long-term relationship. In essence, that you're the problem, that you leave when the heat is on. This can actually, in some cases, turn out to be a really potentially harmful dynamic because you may have been leaving other relationships because you had good instincts. You might have been getting out of toxic relationships. But we're then being hit with this narrative that you're a cut and run person that can't make it work. You're avoidant. And if you really actually are someone who did want a healthy relationship, but were leaving these relationships because the relationship didn't feel right, or you were noticing patterns that didn't seem healthy, your wisdom may have gotten questioned. So you may have sort of squelched your own wisdom. And then for some folks, if this happened to you, it could feel like a challenge, a sort of doubting of your ability to be in a relationship, almost like a prove it. Prove you can stick it out in a relationship. And then because when people call us out, we want to prove, you may stick it out Whether out of not wanting to live in this narrative that people have of you, of being the person who always leaves, or even to prove to yourself or to other people that you can make a relationship work despite being told you cannot. It's a sad challenge to try to win, because as you can see, if you are in a narcissistic relationship and also you're having this narrative thrown at you that you can't make relationships work, or you leave too easily, or you're too extra, or you don't try hard enough, you might say, well, okay, well then I'm going to try harder and I'm going to make this relationship work. And you put your head down and you try to make it work because you want to show that they're wrong about you. You could make a relationship work. And then on top of that, you are in a, let's say you're now in a relationship and you're being gaslighted and manipulated and you're confused and you're blaming yourself, but damn, I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to make it work. They're wrong about me. I can be in a relationship. This particular scenario is more common than you think. There are many reasons a family or other people may cast this kind of judgment on someone. Meanness, dismissiveness, manipulation, undermining, competitiveness, envy, whatever it is. It may even play on attachment styles created by an emotionally abusive family system. A person may actually evolve an avoidant attachment after growing up with a narcissistic parent. Relationships may seem scary, and there may even be a propensity to want to leave relationships. But the very system that left you feeling unsafe in relationships is now challenging you on your capacity to make a relationship work. And you may have this fight response in you and want to prove them wrong. So this becomes intergenerational BS that's playing out at the highest level. It's easy to say, it's easy for me to sit here and say, well, just let them have their narrative about you. You know the truth. Because it doesn't feel that simple to just take that stance. The people who may be jabbing at you like this and invalidating you or just baiting you have likely been emotionally unsafe people in your life for a long time, and that can result in self-doubt. And if relationships have been in the past complicated spaces for you, it's very likely that you will second guess yourself in these situations, especially if you have lots of friends who are getting into relationships and all of that. And that can mean proving to yourself and the world that all these people who are saying you can't make a relationship are wrong, and you can make a relationship work. And now you can see how a person can get stuck in the toxic vortex of a narcissistic relationship. So let's start here. If this has been your story, please be kind to yourself, because in a way it was a terrible setup where you couldn't win. You were trying to prove the world wrong on something that wasn't true, on something that you were very clear about. But sadly, in narcissistic family systems and relationships, messing with other people's minds is sport, with little regard for how it hurts someone. And as you unpack what happened, you will realize that you may have seen it clearly all along, but got swept away in the idea that, damn it, if it's the last thing I do, I'm going to show them that I could make this work. Healing means getting back to that place where if you did have that capacity to intuitively see unhealthy, you could see it. And it means also disengaging from the folks who would be willing to challenge you like this and be willing to shame you for not being able to make an abusive relationship work. I cannot tell you how many people I have talked with who've said to me, I just sort of felt this prevailing narrative of I can't make something work. Sadly came along just when I didn't know what this whole narcissism thing was. I meet this person. Initially, they seem charming and all of that. They even charmed my family. When it started getting toxic, I could hear my family's voice saying like, oh, here we go. Of course, she can't make it work, and this is just a great person. But you know the narcissistic game. They can often be really great to the people they're trying to charm and cruel behind closed doors. That's the nature of these dynamics. And people will say, I just didn't want to live in that narrative that I can't make relationships work. So I tried and I tried and I tried and I tried. And they will say, not hewing to that narrative was a lot of why they got so stuck for so long in the relationship. And so that's what led me to make this video, is I've heard this story too many times. And more of us actually have better instincts than we think. But so often we are more willing to pathologize the person who's like, I don't like the vibe here, versus the person who sticks it out. We're like, yeah, good for you. You stick there in the hard times. Again, the change we need to create in the world is that people really do pay attention to how things feel intuitively in your body. Like, this doesn't feel okay. And it doesn't mean you have to leave everything. It doesn't mean you have to fully disengage, but it may mean you slow down. It may mean you step back. It may mean that you talk with people you trust who aren't turning your life into one big dare. So again, if you've had this dynamic, please, when you feel comfortable, you can drop it in the comments. But again, it's more common than you think. So let's talk about narcissistic death dangling, and specifically around wills, trusts, estates, and narcissistic parents and family members. So folks, these days with people living longer and the cost of caring for people who are getting older in place and later in life care skyrocketing, fewer and fewer people are getting anything left to them by their parents or grandparents other than debt or some bits and pieces. But that said, my guess is that there are plenty of folks out there who either have enough money to pay for all that and still have some left over, or may pass before any of that becomes an issue. And some folks just have a lot of money. And since narcissistic people, on average, tend to have more money, the odds of a well-resourced parent or parents being narcissistic, frankly, are higher. Narcissistic people use their someday coming deaths as a forever dangling manipulation, whether or not they have money. There is a lot of, someday I'm going to die and you will regret not doing this or that for me, or for treating me a certain way, etc., etc. And sadly, these manipulations can work quite well because so many people carry that fear of the possibility of even more regret once the narcissistic parent dies. And since a life with a narcissistic person if you have a narcissistic person in your life, is basically a study in regret, the idea that you can control some of the regret by doing more while the narcissistic person is still alive is a particularly lethal combination. Now, many people with narcissistic parents will say this sort of death dangling as a manipulation keeps them on the chain for a long time, sometimes a lifetime, running themselves ragged to somehow avoid this potential downstream regret. But it becomes a whole different level of games when it comes to things like trusts and wills and estates, especially if there's money or real estate or other meaningful assets of that nature involved. And this dance will get ugly very quickly when narcissistic people are involved. First, you may have a narcissistic parent who will use wills and trusts as a way of manipulating you, especially if you make a choice to do something like distance or disengage from the family system, or if you even speak out against it. Something like, well, I suppose if you do want to move away, there's little need for me to include you in terms of who I leave the house to, that kind of thing. They may also dangle other little bits. Oh gosh, you're so irritated with me all the time. Why would you ever want to hold on to a piece of my jewelry after I've gone? Folks, this is hard to hear, but your sanity really can't have a price put on it. And the fear that people sometimes have, if I disconnect from this family, I will lose money, or I won't get money that is rightfully mine, etc., etc. First of all, any person, frankly, even a narcissistic parent, doesn't have an obligation to leave anything to anyone. They want to leave it to a cat shelter. That's their call, right? But getting caught in the you can't win dance of them saying, oh, you don't want to come home from the holidays. I get that, but I was going to meet with the attorney to talk about the will anyhow. Or you're moving away. I guess I'll switch the will. Or you're marrying this person I don't like. I don't want them to get my money, that kind of thing. And at the end of the day, you may give in to all of their demands and still find out that they may not have followed through on what you thought that they would. The boldest move of all, if these kinds of manipulations are happening to you, regardless of how much money is involved, is to make the choice that is good for your mental health. And I recognize that for some of you, that whatever bequest it is you're expecting may be necessary for you financially later in life, and you believe that knowing that the money is coming is what is good for your mental health. I know that every situation is different. Be clear on what works for you. Otherwise, the promise, though, of what is to come or could be taken can keep you prisoner for a long time. And that doesn't even account for the narcissistic or toxic behavior of other family members or potential beneficiaries. And this can include narcissistic siblings, narcissistic step-parents, or your narcissistic parent or parents' subsequent spouses, your aunts, your uncles, whomever it may be. Because then it is a two-way model with this other narcissistic family member, for example, a sibling, attempting to ingratiate and get in with the narcissistic parent or grandparent to get a larger piece of the pie or even the whole damned pie. And the narcissistic sibling, who was playing the narcissistic parent's ground game and being perfect supply and showing up all the time long enough to get what they feel entitled to. This death dangling, whether it is through wills or trust, or through the possibility of regret and guilt, or the sense that you owe them something, is not unusual with narcissistic parents or grandparents. And once again, the only way to win is to not play the game. But people can get lost, and I understand why, but people can get lost in loops of what's fair and what's just and what equitable division should look like. And it can feel galling to see a manipulative, toxic family member angling and potentially also getting the lion's share. People are living longer, as I said, and narcissistic people often take damned good care of their own health, with little regard for others, so they may even live longer. And they kind of insulate themselves from interpersonal stress because they're the cause of it. So if you're going to hang in there, hoping for what you believe is rightfully yours, you may waste a lot of your life, and it still may not work out the way you hoped. And if it's not money at stake, but just the sense that maybe you could do enough, just enough to stave off regret, folks, there's never enough. And no, there is no deathbed testimony where the narcissist tells you that you did enough. Sometimes the greatest justice is choosing the path that is the healthiest and the most self-preserving. I recognize that for some of you, we may be talking about a fair chunk of change, so it's hard to walk away. For others of you, not so much. But rather, some of you may be holding in there for the sense of what's right. The fact is, right goes out the window when it comes to narcissistic relationships. Sometimes the sense of autonomy and individuation that comes from not playing ball with a manipulative narcissist is so precious that it may simply outweigh whatever it is that the narcissistic person is threatening to withhold. And frankly, a lot of narcissistic people are so disorganized that they never do make the threatened call to the attorney to make the threatened change. Narcissistic relationships are all about power and control. And there are few things that are more powerful and controlling than money. As is the opportunity to stave off future regret. So as you go through these death-dangling situations, tread lightly. So, you're in a toxic relationship of any kind. Narcissistic, antagonistic, toxic, use whatever word works for you, okay? Gaslighting, sadly, becomes your normal in one of these relationships. And you're doing your self-education, right? You're learning about these various toxic dynamics and tactics and all of that. And you're getting even better at detecting them. Gaslighting by design messes with your head. It leaves you with a sort of permanent state of self-doubt. You're thinking through all the angles to figure out if you're not responsible in some way, wanting to record and write and ensure you commit to memory what happened so you can unpack it later, cross-check it against the evidence, Maybe you go to therapy to figure out, is this me? Or you're so confused, right? Or whether the gaslighter is the one who's right. And to find out from the therapist, is there something wrong with you? But there's one gaslighty phrase that we often don't unpack. And I can see that it might be one of the most nefarious and awful of all because of the downstream effects. Are you ready for what this gaslighting line is? You might even drop in the comments if you think you know what it is. No one is going to believe you. So let's set this up as an example. You confront the narcissistic person, never a good idea, but you do, about something they did. Let's go big. Your friend saw your partner kissing or otherwise behaving inappropriately with another person at a bar. They even show you a grainy picture they managed to take before your friend got out of there. You confront your partner. Your partner denies it, tells you you are insane, and then they say, no one is going to believe you. Or, we'll try another scenario. You have a narcissistic parent who everybody actually thinks is a perfectly fine person, maybe even be generous or takes care of people in the family financially, whatever it is they do that makes people think that they're okay. But you know how invalidating they are. One day you're having an argument or a confrontation and you let that family member, the parent, know, I am done. I am finally going to tell certain people in the family that you've lied about this or that. And that narcissistic parent turns to you and says, no one is going to believe you. This tactic works for narcissistic people who are really good at wearing their masks in public, but being so careful and not being seen when they take that mask off in private. So they really are able to maintain a very gregarious and validation-seeking public face. It may be that people like this, they meet this person in your life, they think they're generous. They might be awed by their power. They think this is just a great person who has it all together. They're cool. They may be impressed by their success. But basically, and this is why this whole narcissism thing is such a mind F, is that lots of people may actually really admire and adore this narcissistic person. They may literally think they're upstanding, righteous, just super great, cool, awesome people. And at the same time, lots of people who are in narcissistic and gaslighting relationships, especially before you figure out what is going on, figure out what's happening to you, you may be sliding into your own despair. You may feel increasingly anxious, sad, reassurance-seeking, confused, helpless, self-blaming, self-doubting. Most survivors pre-knowing about narcissism do believe that there's something very wrong with they themselves. And if they have the bad luck of encountering, for example, a therapist who doesn't understand narcissistic abuse, that can only magnify that. Or it could be an HR person, whoever. In addition, lots of people in narcissistic relationships become quite isolated and cut off from other people. They may become distanced from friendships or other sources of support. This comment, no one will believe you, out the gate would paint you sort of as being delusional, right? As though anything you say to other people will sound psychotic to other people. And that dismantling of you, no one's going to listen to you, no one's going to believe you. That's what qualifies a statement like this, not only as gaslighting, but really, really pernicious gaslighting. Meanwhile, the narcissistic person may continue to go through the world as a grandiose raconteur, accumulating successes and admiration and friends and adulation. So when the day comes that you do call the narcissistic person out on anything, for them to push back and say that no one's going to believe you, well, that can actually ring true for you and magnify the helplessness, hopelessness, powerlessness, sadness, and anxiety you feel in this relationship. Because sadly, it may actually be true. People may not believe you. Oh, I think you're misperceiving that. Or all families have stuff. Or I think you don't get it. Or I find that hard to believe. Or I've never had any trouble with them. On and on. Other people doubting you even further. So yeah, you're right. They may not believe you. But whether it is true or not that other people will not believe you, you may find that just hearing that comment, that no one will believe you, is enough to stop you from seeking help, seeking support, seeking clarity. You may just isolate further. Despite the grain of truth that may be there, the isolation can really impede healing and clarity. This is not only something that happens in narcissistic relationships, but any kind of abusive or traumatizing behavior, and particularly if someone who is really disempowered like a child is involved, no one will believe you. The two-mask cultivation of perpetrators and narcissists, a public face that people value and a private face of menace, manipulation, and gaslighting, is why narcissistic abuse and antagonistic abuse is such a unique space. Listen, if someone is clearly kind of an abusive, awful person to everyone, people will believe you and maybe even help you. But if the charming, charismatic, gracious, generous, pillar of the community, successful person is the one that's harming you, and they drop that bomb in there, it only reinforces what you suspect. Someone will believe you, but if they initially don't, and people you talk to initially doubt you, it can magnify the impact of the emotional abuse you're enduring and push you even further into isolation. And then you may never find that someone who will believe you. I hope that gives some clarity on a dynamic that I'm sure many of you have encountered in your toxic relationships, because it is a phrase that many of you may have experienced, and seeing what it is and what it does to you is really important in understanding how these relationships work. I hope that's helpful. I don't think we talk about this as a form of gaslighting enough. Thanks again.